So hello, everyone. My name is Joan Devine. I'm the Director of Education with Pioneer Network, and I'd like to officially welcome you to today's webinar, part of our 2020 Sharing the Vision series. I would like to acknowledge and thank the sponsor of this webinar, IN2L. You'll be hearing more from some of their team. A few logistics before we start. All webinar attendees, except for the presenters, are muted to minimize the possibility of background noise. That said, we do love hearing from you. So in the toolbar, you'll see icons for the chat box, for Q&A. There's also some little icons you can click on to provide some quick feedback, as well as a place to raise your hand should you want to ask a question live. Following the webinar, you'll receive an email that will include a link to today's presentation, copy of the slides and handouts. A few resources that are cited during the presentation will be available to you as well, and a certificate of attendance. In addition, the webinar and all the materials will be posted in the Pioneer Network website resource library under the video section, so you can share it with lots of folks. Our speakers today are Scott Smith, who is Director of Education and Experience for Thrive Senior Living. Scott has led team members in nearly 500 communities and taught them about the benefits of the use of technology to engage residents in person-centered, person-directed care. He also develops company-wide training and leads the implementation of new programs and technology. Karen O'Hearn is Vice President of Product Management for IN2L, where she leads a team in the formulation, and execution of a customer-centric strategy for bringing new solutions to markets that create the highest level of customer value. Scott and Karen bring a wealth of information to share, but before you hear from them, I'm honored to be present with them. And I'll start the webinar by sharing some information, a little bit of background that will form a foundation to what they will then be bringing. In terms of my background, besides being the Director of Education for Pioneer Network and a passionate advocate for person-centered, person-directed care and changing the culture of aging, I have a background in both life enrichment and nursing, having started my work in long-term care as an activity director and then moving into nursing positions. Let's see. Purposeful engagement as a means of supporting quality of life for elders living in residential care settings has always been a challenge in a world that was built around a medical model. And we all know that the focus of that medical model is efficiency and tasks. It's never been more evident, I think, than in the world we're currently living in. Since the onset of COVID-19, the need to maintain safety has been key, as it should be. And one of the major interventions that the experts all tell us to practice, and that we've been doing a pretty good job of, is social distancing. But has that directive, has that intervention led us down a path that's impacting the elders we serve in a negative way? I don't think any of us would argue with the intent, would argue with the practice. It is the right thing to do. But as we all know, words matter, and maybe we've been using the wrong words. And so let's talk a little bit about instead of social distancing, or are we really talking about physical distancing? And I think more and more people have begun to use that term of telling people that it is physical distancing and not social distancing. In a survey conducted by Alterum, a nonprofit research and consulting organization, they suggested different words: distance socializing versus socially distancing. Kind of cool language when you think about it. Very different meanings that can support very different outcomes, very different ways that what we are doing then impacts our lives and the lives of the residents we work with. We know that the lives of residents in nursing homes have been dramatically affected by the restrictions imposed by COVID. How? In Alterum's study, how COVID-19 restrictions affected nursing home residents, they went directly to residents for the answers, and I'd like to share a few of those with you. The first question was related to the impact of COVID on visits with friends and families. I don't think what they found is a surprise to any of us, but when we look at these responses, there's two things I think we need to focus on. Certainly the impact of COVID on resident engagement, but we would be remiss if we didn't recognize that there were problems before COVID. Connection with friends and families is so very important. No question, the number of visits is way down with COVID. But even before COVID, look at what they told us. About 25% of residents shared that they had visitors 2 times a week or less. How many of us would be happy visiting 2 times a week or less with our friends or our families. Another question they asked, how many times during the week did you leave the nursing home? Again, we're not surprised that very few people have that opportunity to go out in these times. Most of us have very limited opportunities to go out. But look at the reality before COVID. 42% of residents didn't leave the nursing home in a week. Think of how you felt during the pandemic, how you felt not being able to get out of the house, how stir crazy so many people have gotten during this time, the impact it has had on our health, certainly on our mental health. But it's not just about getting out into the greater community that is or was an issue for residents. Getting outside, period, has been a challenge now and before. How many of you would be content not to be able to enjoy going outside more than 2 times a week? For most of us, think of how many of the things that provide us meaning and purpose, the things that you engage in, happen outdoors. Think about how you feel after a long winter. And certainly this information reminds us of the value of going to the dining room, not just as a place to consume food, but a place to be with others. Dining is a social event. We are missing out on that wonderful social opportunity during this time. So we know that COVID has created and exacerbated some problems that exist in creating opportunities for engagement for residents in communities' life settings. And Scott and Karen will share some opportunities and examples with you. But before we get there, what is meaningful engagement? So I'm going to start by talking about meaning and purpose. But instead of my telling you what meaning is, like, you tell me what is meaning and purpose. So I would love for you to type into the chat box what it is that brings meaning and purpose to your life. So just jot down a little bit of what that is. Okay, there we go. Work. Well, I'm sure your coworkers love that is meaningful for you, and it's wonderful that it's meaningful for you. Hugs from my hubby, love it. Getting to call my 91-year-old mom, family, talking with friends and neighbors, reading books, engaging in advocacy, cats, petting my cat. There you go. So lots of different things. You know, when we ask people what is meaningful and purposeful, family, companionship, they just keep coming. Grandchildren, I'm with you there, Melody. Connecting with nature. That answer is very personal. It is different for all of us, what it is that creates meaning and purpose. And the other question about meaning and purpose is, does it ever change? The things that were really meaningful to you today, were they the same things that were meaningful to you 10, 20, 30 years ago? And are they the same things that you think will be those things that bring you meaning and purpose 10, 20, or 30 years from now? Some of them, yes. Some of them, maybe not. So in the culture change world, we've been provided with some tools that can help us discover meaning and purpose. One of the most powerful of these is a life story. We also have resources to help us understand how to know people and support them in a person-centered way. 2 of my very favorite tools are the Pioneer Network Values, that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, and the Eden Alternative Domains of Wellbeing. So let's take a look. Oops, and I need to move something on my screen so that, there we go, the domains of well-being. The first one of those is identity. Know each person is the Pioneer Network value that kind of fits with identity. So we all want people to understand who we are because we are unique. Just as what you shared with us provides meaning and purpose, it is part of who you are. It is part of knowing you. The next domain that we'll look at is autonomy. We want to make our own decisions. You know, right now, so many decisions are taken away from individuals when they come to community settings to start out with. And now in this time of COVID, how many more decisions have been taken away from people? You know, one of Pioneer Network values, and in fact, my favorite one, is risk-taking is a normal part of life. We are focused on safety, but focus on safety takes us away from a willingness to support risk. It scares us. The other piece on autonomy that Pioneer Network Values tells us is that all elders are entitled to self-determination wherever they live. And we hear that from residents now as we go through COVID, that they're ready to say, this is what I want to do. And are you listening to me? That's part of who they are. They have things that they want to do, even in the midst of this crisis. The next thing we would look at as far as a domain of well-being is security. Now, security is more than just your doors being locked and making sure that an intruder doesn't get into your home. Security is about supporting dignity and privacy and respect for people. And maybe we've over-supported privacy right now because of this isolation. So sometimes surplus, as they say, surplus security can be a challenge too. Pioneer Network reminds us to put the person before the task. So always remember that person. And the other value that I think kind of fits with this is to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So what is that level of security? What is that level of dignity and privacy and respect that is meaningful to you? The next domain of well-being is joy. Responding to the spirit as well as the mind and body. That's, I think, Pioneer Network's take on finding joy for people. And I think we have been challenged with finding that joy, and that joy comes from those things that have meaning and purpose for us. And if we're not able to be a part of those things that provide us meaning and purpose, we're going to lose joy in our lives as well. The next domain of well-being is growth. We talk about, when do you stop growing? You don't. You never stop growing. And Pioneer Network tells us we need to promote the growth and development of all. And we need to practice self-examination, searching for new creativity and opportunities for doing better. So that's something that makes us whole. That makes us something who we are. It's something that provides us with meaning and purpose. This one, I think, certainly in these times of COVID, we have certainly felt the impact on this domain of well-being, and that is connectedness. We don't have friends and families visiting. We're not able to go out. We're not able to do things. Our residents can't even get together sometimes with the residents that they have always related to within the community. And even that connection with their staff, with the staff that is so close to them, has changed. Relationship is the fundamental building block of a transformed culture. Community is the antidote to institutionalization. So without that community, without that connectedness, it takes us back to being in a place where those of us who truly are passionate and believe in the value of person-centeredness and of the home, we maybe feel a little bit that we're losing a little bit of that in the midst of all this. And then the last domain of well-being is meaning. Each person can and does make a difference. That's Pioneer Network's value that I think fits in with meaning. We want meaning in our lives, and the things that we do create that meaning, and those come from having a purpose. And then certainly Pioneer Network has a couple other values that didn't quite fit in, but I think they kind of fit in with all of them. And one of them is shape and use the potential of the environment in all its aspects: physical, organizational, psychosocial, spiritual. And those are certainly things that, as Scott and Karen talk, you're going to hear how they have found some great ways to make that happen. And then recognize that culture change and transformation are not destinations, but journeys. In this time of COVID, yes, we've been challenged by all these things, but just as the study showed, maybe it's woken us up a little bit to some things that we knew were not the best within our cultures, within our organizations, and hopefully we'll come out of this even better on the other end. I just want to share, as we support the domains of well-being, it's so vital for our residents. It's so vital for ourselves. So we need to create meaning and purpose in life. It keeps us all going. It gives us a reason to get up in the morning. And these quotes are from Altrum's survey. You can hear in these quotes the impact of isolation, of days spent without a purpose, void of meaningful engagement. We know this, we get this, but how can we do something about it? I'm pleased to turn over the presentation now to Karen and Scott, who are going to answer those questions.
Thank you, Joan. That was really a terrific and a wonderful framework for us to use. And I think for everybody who's with us today, whether you're really implementing and starting this journey for the first time around creating this purposeful engagement in your community, or you're evolving what you already have quite solid today. I've got the real pleasure of presenting this next section with my colleague Scott Smith, who's a Director of Education Experience at Thrive Senior Living. In this section, Scott and I are going to be talking about how we can truly deliver on purpose. I want us to think together, what might it look like? How might we need to change our own thinking and our approach to our work? Scott's been leading this on the provider side at Thrive, and he's got just a wealth of information. And as Vice President of Product Management at IN2L, I'm going to be talking about how technology can enable these practices, much of what we have in development right now. So let's kick in, reframe our thinking and our approaches. In our discussion, we're going to lay out for you 3 areas to evaluate how you can incorporate more purposeful engagement. This first one is from activity to active. Scott, why don't you take us through that? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so when we look at this activity to active, it's really doing a self-evaluation on what your programming looks like in your community. So asking the question, are you getting interaction and engagement when activity staff is not present? What does your community look like when you do not have your life enrichment director on campus at that time? And is there a lot of, do we see a huge dip in interaction at that time? And if we do, what we probably have is we have an activity-based culture where we are waiting for somebody to engage the residents. And what we really want to aim for is that we have an active life culture where our residents are creating the activity and the activeness within the community. And so what we really start to look at, and the question we need to ask ourselves is, am I too involved in entertaining residents and not in connecting residents? And am I spending most of my day kind of as the entertainer and not really as a connector? And so what we want to talk about is that when we have deep knowing of our residents and our team members, but really on our residents, we can create connections and groups based on their interest. So one of our goals is to aim for creating communities based on similar interests and passions. So knowing our residents and saying, I have 3 or 4 people who are retired teachers. I want to bring those 3 or 4 people together because they share at some point in life, they shared a passion for education and for teaching and for children. And so how do I bring them together now? And so we also want to look at, like, what is the ideal setting for this? What does it look like in my community? And where we really want to be moving towards is this idea of the activity calendar is replaced by a club model, and not having such large group activities, but really looking at what are the connectors between different residents that we can bring individuals together. We want to create small groups that can be resident-led or led by any team member in the community, not just by that life enrichment director. One of the things that I see a lot, and I'm sure all of you on this call do, many of the residents have lost the ability, or they've lost that skill of how to make new friends. They really struggle with, how do I go about introducing myself and meeting new people? And they may not have done that in 20, 30, 40 years. And so one of our roles is to really create on-ramps for connectivity. And by having deep knowing of all of our residents, we can say, Mrs. Johnson, I think you might really, really hit it off with these 3 people. And you form a connection around an interest, and those individuals then kind of form their own kind of social network or social group. And so with all of this isn't easy, right? If it was easy, we'd all be doing it. There's so much going on in your community. You have so many different residents. Karen, how do you think technology can help as we look at a club-based model based on interest?
Yes, Scott, I mean, you've really hit on it. It's not easy, and so it's not going to just happen organically. This is really a prime time, an opportunity for us to leverage that technology. I mean, you talked about this deep knowing. So one of the areas that we could leverage technology is in automating interest matching. And one of the things I want us all to think about is with interest matching, we're not just talking about the interests, the past interests, the hobbies, the experiences. Joan spoke about that, but future aspirations as well. And when we collect these from our elders, then to ensure that we have automated process to be able to pull up what those interests are for each one of our elders. But another key piece, Scott, is to integrate that into the workflow of all team members. We've got to make it actionable. When I go through communities across the country, 9 times out of 10, if not more of that, all of these interests lie in binders. So I don't know if that's ringing a bell with those of you on the webinar today and listening, but let's think about how do we make it actionable and move beyond these binders. But I'll tell you, technology needs to take us beyond just revealing the individual's interest as well. Technology needs to automate the matches of elders with other matches who have similar interests. Because now what we've got is this real creation of this network of elders within our community. So Scott, you've talked about this club model, these small groups getting together. We've just defined the starting point as identifying these like interests. But what else do you see that this takes?
Yeah, and so I'm trying to change the slide here. There we go. So what we really want to do, it comes down to how do you see yourself if you're in that life enrichment role? It's overcoming 2 ingrained thoughts that we have. The first one is, what is your individual role in the community? Your role is not to entertain. It's not to be the cruise director. It is to be the connector. Role is to create an environment and opportunities to connect people with each other and their passions. So if you really change the thinking of your role as my job is not to stand in front of a group of 25 residents and entertain them 5 times a day, 5 days a week. My job is to really understand through deep knowing of my residents is to create connections between like-minded or like-interested residents, and then give them opportunities to pursue those interests. The second thing that we need to change when it comes to our own kind of perception of our role in a community is, what does success look like? What is successful engagement? Currently, many of us, or in the industry, we would say having large group activities where a large percentage of residents attend, a 25, 30 person group activity, that is success. And what I would push back on is saying that how many of those people are truly engaged in meaningful engagement in that group of 25? How many of those individuals are there because they're passionate about what you're doing, or are they there just because it's something to do? And so reframing, what does success look like in engagement? It may be for some, a group of 25 is a great goal and it's really engaging, but for most of us, it's not going to be. You think about the introverts in your community where that idea of being in a group of 25 is just so overwhelming to them. They're not going to get the joy that we want or the purpose that we want from a large group activity. For some of our residents, reading the newspaper on the porch, and we saw some of the statistics of how often our residents are getting outside, and that should be extremely alarming to all of us in this industry. Reading the paper on the porch, that's engagement. Sitting down and watching a baseball game with one other person while they enjoy a cold beer or a drink, that's engagement. So redefining what engagement looks like, and it may look different for one person than it does for somebody else. And then how do we create those opportunities for that small 1, 2, 3 person engagement? So that's kind of where we really are. And so our ideal situation is where our team members and residents are facilitating passion and interest-based groups. And you can see on this slide, it does not say that the activity director, the life enrichment director is facilitating passion interest-based groups. It's the entire team that is doing that. So looking at the interest of your residents and saying what team members share that same passion. And can we create a small group of like-minded and like-interested people? You may have a group of residents who are very passionate about photography, or they've always been interested in photography. And you may have a care team member who has their own photography business on the side, or that's something that they're interested in. that can be a small group of 2, 3, 4 people. And that is extremely successful. That's an extreme, it might not have 25 people in it, but it's an extremely successful group for engagement. And so we want to really start looking at how does that become the norm for us? How do we really make sure this engagement is meaningful? And once you know your residents' background and interest, you can create on-ramps for connections. And and the key phrase I'm going to say right now that I hope everybody on this call hears and is listening to this webinar, you do not have to be the one to lead everything in your community. Your role is to kind of be the director, the connector. That is the role. It's not to be the one who's doing all of it. So finding small group and that have similar interests with your team members can be a huge benefit for you. So again, our current model is of a packed activity calendar and investing money in different supplies and a closet full of things that we can do for our group activities. Karen, what do you see technology fitting in with this? If we try to move from big group activities to many small group activities, how do you see technology helping?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. You know, it's so interesting. I was on the call with a number of leaders from a few different communities this morning, and they were talking about this very thing. But one of the ahas was that, you know, bringing staff in as well, which they did during COVID. So I love what you've pulled out there. But let's unpack this because there's a lot here that technology can do for us. If we think about it, technology should enable you to foster new relationships across a community to create camaraderie built off of common interests or ambitions, the things that they might want to explore together. So technology is really an ideal facilitator for both the event-based activities that you've been talking about, but also for these ongoing moments of connection that you've emphasized we really need to be thinking about. So let's go back to what we were talking about just a few minutes ago with this interest matching. You need to be collecting interest of staff as well. So if we have these pieces of information about our residents, what about staff? And how do we match? We talked about elder to elder matches, but what about staff to elder matches as well? So at the most basic level, when we think about this, this enables everyone to know each other as people, no matter what their role, no whether they're staff, team member, or resident, and no matter how new they are to the community. And the second piece that we should be thinking about with technology is to match these groups of elders with similar interests to relevant and interesting content. So think about this when you're thinking about your staff members. Scott gave the example about one of the staff members being interested in photography and maybe leading it. Well, what might stand in the way? One is, do we enable them to do that? But two, do we have technology offering this up as a complete package? Here are the elders that might be interested in that activity themselves, but then here's some content that you could turn to and use as a springboard to those discussions and those activities. So really what we're talking about is leveraging technology to be this effortless way to customize possibilities at the individual level. So technology needs to be making this seamless for you. So there's no hours and hours of prep needed for whether you're the director of activities or whether or not you're a staff member stepping in. So technology we should be thinking about really as this enabling resource and think about how we turn to it to enable us, even as staff members, to be able to do that. So it's funny when we talk about this, even at this part of the webinar, I'm already really feeling to start to feel the change within the community's culture. But I'll tell you, it's starting to lead me to wonder, Scott, what's the elders' role in all of this?
Yeah, so what we look at is how do we create what we would call, we hear the term, right? We want to change from person-centered care to person-directed care. And so our goal with all of this is that if you guys think of the model, and I'm trying to get the slide to change, it's taking a bit here. where we think of person-centered care, which is that we hear that term a lot, which is our resident is in the middle, and we have all around the outside, we have doctors and family members and our team members, the community, all around, and the arrow's pointing in, and it's us making decisions for that resident. That is person-centered care. The person is at the center of all of that. If we shift our thinking to person-directed care, where the arrows flow out, where our residents are in the center and they're making the decision, and we are then the ones that are helping remove roadblocks. And so we talked earlier, and Joan talked about the domain of well-being, and the one that resonated the most with me was autonomy. And the reason being is because that simplifies this whole idea of person-directed care. When the resident gets to make the choices of what their engagement looks like, who they're hanging out with, what they're doing on a daily basis, what they're eating, that creates a better well-being among our residents. We want to know through deep knowing, and then having a place where we can find that later on, what makes that resident's heart come alive? And then how do we as a team help facilitate that for them? If we really break down the role of life enrichment down to that concept of is knowing for each resident what makes their heart come alive and how do we help facilitate that for them, that will change the way we do our programming. So when and then what we want to aim for, and it says right here, an environment where purpose can flourish. Our role is to help connect residents to areas of interest and people inside and outside of our communities that have that same interest. Instead of just saying that this is a closed off community where only this number of people are here, and this is where all of our friends have to be and all of our social interaction has to be, look at your community at large, being outside of the building into the city and saying, are there things happening that I can connect my resident to? They have that group of 3 has a passion for photography. Is there somewhere they can go to display their pictures or to see some artwork or to go out and take a walk and take some nature photos? How do we then create kind of on-ramps to make that even more dynamic? Right? And so that's one of the things that we want to aim for. And that all comes down to what we would call deep knowing. And I'm changing the slide here. And so it seems to be delayed when it comes to you guys. But what we really want to look at is once we identify their passions and we connect them with others, our role in the community is to be a resource for them. Is to say, what do you want in order to make this happen? Our goal is to remove roadblocks, not to install roadblocks. And so that's what we really want, is residents that are empowered to self-direct connections. Our job is to help create those connections, remove roadblocks for connections, and remove roadblocks for their heart to come alive. That's what we really want to focus on with this. And so, Karen, there's this great diagram right here. Can you kind of explain how technology has been used in the past and how we want to see technology used to help with this idea of empowerment and self-directed connections?
Yeah, definitely. I think what we're really talking about here, Scott, is that the key is that you have to have technology access for your elders. You've got to help elders take ownership of their own engagement through their own device. We've got to ensure that elders have access to technology. And the key here is technology that's been developed for them. That's simple. It doesn't require previous technological experience. And I'm sure that all of you as staff members realize the importance of that as well, because of much of the technology that's been used during COVID has enabled connections. It's enabled some purpose-filled times, but it's been too tough for the seniors to use and they can't navigate. So it's very important that we put technology in the hands for our seniors that have been developed for them and allows them to be competent. And when we put this technology in the hands and we provide them access, it's got to include what we've already spoken about, the visibility to interest matching with others, and these content suggestions. So I think about this as really a recommendation engine, as this complete package that we've talked about. But let me talk about this diagram that Scott had referenced on the right side of the slide. You see on the bottom two levels, this diagram actually was created out of the MIT Age Lab. And it's really relates to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if we think about it. And as we look at all of the technology innovations today, you probably have recognized that there's really an abundance of new technology that's coming out on falls and on monitoring and on self-monitoring and then on alerts, et cetera, which really focuses on these bottom two rungs for the safety and the health. Everything that we're talking about today around purposeful engagement is on the upper three tiers of this. So all of this is important for quality aging, but we're saying let's not forget with the safety and health pieces that are in place, we need to have connectivity, which is around communication and entertainment and meaningful leisure activities, contribution, which is around the education and cognitive enhancement, all of which is stimulated when we engage with others, and legacy, which is around learning, going to creative media, cross-generational, et cetera. When we provide our elders the technology in their hands that they can use and feel confident with and have access to all of the time, they can then choose how, they can choose when, and they can choose with whom they actually want to engage. And that's critical in terms of person-directed and this autonomous lifestyle that we're talking about. So Joan mentioned earlier, these needs have always been present in senior living, but the COVID crisis has really put a spotlight on these issues and has really made them mission critical for us to actually address. So Scott, what would you say some of the lessons from the provider side are that you have learned during this time?
Yeah, I think, many of us are tired of hearing about the pandemic and COVID and all of that, but there are some positives and things that we've learned from it that we can take as we go forward. So these are some of the trends that we think deserve consideration, that being by yourself isn't necessarily isolation. Some of us need to be alone sometimes to recharge. And so the question is, how do we give them the technology or the tools they need for that alone time to not be isolation? And so being alone or one-on-one, for many of us, reading the newspaper on the front porch or reading a book on the back patio is the best engagement we could possibly have. Now, we want to create nudges to get residents out of their rooms so that we're not feeling like they're confined into a small space. But a resident who wants to sit by themselves and read a book, that person is engaged and they are not necessarily isolated. We see small groups are on the rise. To me, and again, we've talked about this, meaningful engagement is more impactful than large group, I have a bunch of people in the room engagement. Because when we get small groups based on interest, we're more likely to be meaningful for the residents. And I have this theory that from when I look at numbers in our communities at Thrive of who's attending different activities. It's it needs a catchier name, but I call it the 1/3 theory. And what that means to me is 1/3 of the residents are coming to group activities because it's on the calendar and they're like, hey, I need to go. There's just 1/3 of them are there out of obligation or they feel bad for you as the person leading it. So they're going to show up no matter what. 1/3 of them are coming because they're actually genuinely interested in what is happening. And then 1/3 are not coming at all because it doesn't interest them, or they want to be in a smaller group, or they don't want to be in a large group activity. And so really looking at that, how do we engage that third who doesn't want to come to the large group? And then how do we create that other third? How do we create meaningful engagement for them? So when they do come, it's something that they're really interested in. And then the next point here is, so we look down to the shift in the mindset. So bigger isn't always better. If it's not meaningful for everyone there, it doesn't mean it's a better activity because more people were there. And we can check off on our attendance that we engaged that person. If we have 25 people, but only 5 or 10 or 12 are fully engaged, then we're not really fully engaging all of our residents. The other things that we're on there is, are we being honest about engagement? Are we being honest about engagement in our community. Are we doing what they want to do, or are we doing what we think they want to do? And having that honest look at your calendar and saying, is this based on what I think they want to do? Or is this based on deep knowing of the residents and saying, this is the kind of thing that the group that I have would enjoy doing? And then we look at this idea of this idea out there that our elders are tech averse. And people have this kind of thinking. This is kind of this idea that all residents, all elders are tech averse. And Karen, in your role, what have you heard about that? What have you seen on your travels and in times you've been engaging with the elders that you've talked to?
Yeah, I think that's an important question, Scott. I guess I would ask us also to be honest with ourselves about this and to really look deep. Are we carrying this bias ourselves? And is that a label then that we are ascribing or are projecting to our elders? Because what we've learned in COVID is that elders will use new technology and they're going to become competent when it fills a personal, unmet need. Because technology, look, everything we've talked about today is technology becomes a connective tissue. And I want to be really clear, at IN2L, we don't look at technology as the thing to form a relationship with, but rather as an enabler to enhance relationships and connections that can happen between elders in the community, with others outside of the community, and with staff as well. So technology needs to help the staff and elders alike in these dyads, in small groups, in larger groups. The reality, guys, you know this, we're going to be doing what I call kind of expansion and contraction. I call it the accordion model that we're going to be using. We're going to be needing, probably based on circumstance in many cases, for quite a while to be able to contract back with smaller groups. And technology should enable you to keep those people connected and to not let those relationships go awry when those times need to happen. And it helps you as staff members gain efficiency in these small group gatherings, in the small group gatherings that we've been talking about. So let's just wrap up. I'm watching the time here and talk about how do we move from current state to desired state. And let's go to the next slide and pull it all together. And as that is happening, let me give you a challenge as Scott's going through this. Look at what you're doing today in light of these opportunities that we've presented. Which are the processes and strategies that you have yourselves that should stay? Make sure that you keep your strengths as you move down this path. But then what needs to be addressed? What needs to be added? What is it you need to develop to continue to enhance purposeful engagement? And how do you shift your own thinking, your tools, and yes, your budget to support this ideal state? So Scott, can I ask you to summarize for us and take us through what we've talked about today?
Yeah, so you probably fall somewhere on this path, somewhere on these 6. And depending on where you fall is kind of where you need to start. So first thing is we have to deeply know our residents, their backgrounds, their passions, what makes them excited. Are they an introvert? Are they an extrovert? If they could go anywhere, where would they want to go? All of this deep knowing of our residents is essential to creating purposeful engagement. Because if we don't know what makes their heart come alive, we can't help create on-ramps to those things. So that's our very first thing. And then the second thing is to say, now that I know and I have deep knowing of my residents, let me look at the tools I have. Do my supplies match the need of my residents? Do I have technology that will allow my residents to travel anywhere virtually or to go anywhere they want to or learn about anything they want to learn about? Evaluate the tools that you currently have and say, what do I need to really ensure that my residents have access to the things that make that is purposeful? Begin making connections. At Thrive, we don't call our activity or our life enrichment people, we don't call them life enrichment or activity directors. We call them social network directors. The reason being is because their job is to make connections and to create a social network among the residents and to find like-minded people with the same interests and things that we think they would really hit it off, to bring those people together and then remove roadblocks. So again, number 4 is support purpose. Once we have we know what people like, we have people connected with each other. Your job is then to really help remove the roadblocks, to help support their purpose, to give them the resources they need to really find that purposeful engagement. Fifth is to stop measuring your success based on the number of people who come to an individual activity, and to really go, was this meaningful for the people who are in that room? I could have the most meaningful engagement with 2 or 3 people, and have it much more meaningful than I have with 15 or 20 people. It's based on, was this of an interest of them? Was it meaningful for them? Did it serve a purpose? Did it meet their needs? And then 6, the one that I think is a huge part of this, and I believe, we talked about this at the very beginning about those domains, when we talked about just the idea of risk. Don't set limits for your residents. Our residents, when they find other people with same interests, may have some ideas and thoughts and desires that go outside of our comfort zone a little bit. But our job is to make those things happen, to work with the families, to work with the community, to work with our leaders in our building, to really make those things happen. We should never be the ones telling our residents no when they're pursuing a passion that they have. They've earned the right to pursue that, and our role is to then help them get there at all costs. And so that's really what we want to be doing with that. And so with that, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you found some interest in this, and you found some nuggets of information that really will help you as you go forward, is really thinking about purposeful engagement and redefining what a activity director, a life enrichment director does. My challenge to you is to really find where on that 6 you fall in and start moving through that path. Maybe for you, it's, I need to really understand and know my residents. I need to get that down somewhere, and we need to go back into that binder, and we need to digitalize that, or we need to do something, use technology to make sure that everybody knows what makes that person's heart come alive. For some of you, it may be, I want to connect these 3 teachers who are retired. I know they'll get along. Maybe we set up a retired teachers lunch, or it's just these 3 teachers and you sitting there and you help build those connections with each other. So my challenge is, do something with the information that you learned in the next week or so, and really start working on getting these small groups going. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to turn it back over to Joan, but appreciate your time and any questions you guys may have.
Thank you, Scott and Karen. And we do have one question, and certainly we know we're at the 45 minutes, but we're more than happy to stay on for a little bit and answer some questions. We do have a question from Kate, and Kate, you are certainly challenging us with this one. The question is, will surveyors honor the person-directed care? I'm going to take that one first. And I will say to you, Kate, yes, I truly believe they will. Certainly surveyors are individual, just like everyone else. But it is truly written into the regulations now that person-directed care is the standard that we should be practicing. Sometimes it's not the what you do, it's the how you do it. So making sure that it's care planned, making sure that you are supporting the decisions that you're making. And I think Kathy is still on. And Kathy from Pioneer Network, if you're still on, if you wouldn't mind putting a link in there for Kate to there's a document in our resource library on care planning for risk that helps you evaluate risk. And so that if that's what your concern is with the surveyors, you have a process to help guide you through that, and involve your surveyors. Talk to them when you have a resident that maybe has a particularly challenging need that you're looking for a way to honor, but I challenge you to find a way to say yes to that. The second one is really the tough question here. How do we deal with the apathy and depression that often needs person-centered focus because the individual is not willing or able to direct? So I don't know, Scott, if you have any ideas about that one?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the very beginning, which is deep knowing. And so what is that individual person passionate about, and how do we introduce that to them? And it may be more of a heavy lift for our team at first, because there is a wall that they've built up. And so what we really want to do is introduce those things to them. But we have to know what they're passionate about. We have to understand what makes them excited. And even if they're going through depression and there's some apathy there, if we can introduce what we would call nudges towards that, the more that we can kind of create opportunities for them to engage in that, the more likely they're going to do that. Again, somebody who maybe has some apathy or depression, the idea of joining a large group can be really, really intimidating. But the idea of sitting with one other person or with a team member and talking about something that they really love talking about is the first step in moving them that way. So it might be person-centered at first because we're the ones doing that heavy lift. But because it's something that we know that they are extremely interested in and have a passion for, we can then see how far they want to go with that at that time. But our job is to nudge them a little bit further each day in getting involved in that thing that they're passionate about.
Well, thank you, Scott. That was a great answer. And so with that, I think we have no more questions. Yes, we do, except that, yes, you will get a recording. So I would like to, on behalf of Pioneer Network, to really thank Karen and Scott for sharing such great information, to IN2L for sponsoring this webinar. And I'd like to acknowledge Allison Hart from IN2L, who supported us from behind the scenes. We couldn't have done it without you, Allison. So now what's next? Immediately after the webinar, a survey will open up in your browser, and we really would appreciate you taking a few minutes to give us your feedback on today's webinar. In approximately 24 hours, you'll be receiving an email with the webinar recording, the materials that we mentioned, and another chance to complete the survey in case you missed it. And I will also put a link to the document that I referenced, because I don't know if Kathy had to get off, but I don't see that she's put that in the chat box, but I'll make sure everybody gets that. And then there's more. Within a week, the recording and all of the supporting documents will also be available in the video resources section of the Pioneer Network resource library. So anybody can enjoy and learn from this wonderful webinar that was presented today. I'd like to share just what's coming next. While this has been the final webinar for 2020 in the Sharing the Vision series, we still have some great webinars coming up. The next one is Growing Person-Centered in our Growing Person-Centeredness series. And we're so pleased to have Joanne Rader, who is a Pioneer Network co-founder and best known for her work with Bathing Without a Battle. And she's going to be sharing her thoughts about how getting back to basics can sometimes be the way to find the answers that you're looking for. And in December, we'll end the year with the last of the series of Pioneer Network Eden Alternative Better Together webinars on a topic that for many is the elephant in the room. Let's talk about sex, intimacy, sexual expression, and living with dementia. So we hope you'll join us for those. We hope that you'll stay connected with Pioneer Network. I know that time is precious. And so on behalf of the team from Pioneer Network and IN2L, we thank you so much for sharing your time with us. A very, very special thanks to Karen and Scott. We wish everyone a good day, and please be safe.